US President Donald Trump is delaying tariffs on imports from Mexico for a month. Its President Claudia Sheinbaum says. She spoke to Trump on the phone earlier today and told reporters she had gained the concession in return for increased efforts to combat cross-border drug trafficking. President Trump has posted on Truth Social about his phone call with the Mexican leader, saying it was a very friendly conversation wherein she agreed to immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers on the border separating Mexico and the US. We further agreed to immediately pause the anticipated tariffs for a one-month period, during which we'll have negotiations headed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick. And President Trump said, I look forward to participating in those negotiations with President Sheinbaum as we attempt to achieve a deal between our two countries. Well, Mr. Trump had said a 25% import tax on goods from Mexico would begin on Tuesday, along with tariffs on goods from Canada and China. US stock markets are down after opening for the first day of trading since President Trump confirmed those tariffs. He's also said that he'll definitely impose taxes on goods imported to the US from the EU. Well, in a moment, we'll get reaction to the tariffs from Mexico with our correspondent Will Grant. But first, let's go to Washington and our correspondent there, Merlin Thomas. And Merlin, bring us up to date on anything else the Trump administration is saying about the subject of tariffs.
So President Trump has said that he had a very friendly conversation with the Mexican president, and that will result in 10,000 troops being deployed to the border from Mexico, and that will reinforce the border and its security. Now, this will be a welcome reprieve for Mexico, but for President Trump, this will be characterized as a big win. The White House will declare this as a victory. And be it economic, be it strategic, this is really a sign of his intended motivation for these tariffs to be used as a negotiating tactic to get the stated aims that he wants. So he said he wanted to curb immigration and to stop the flow of illegal drugs, and that is what he'll be able to say that he has done. And for his fan base, for his supporters, this will be characterized as President Trump has gone to battle with Mexico. He stood up for what he believed in, and he has achieved what he wanted. Now, Canada will be looking at this development very closely as it's at the beginning of what appears to be an all-out trade war. And, you know, they've already announced a raft of measures on over $100 billion worth of goods. And so for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the question is, will he be able to cut a similar deal with the American president?
OK, Merlin, we will ask that question in a few moments, but thank you for the moment. Will Grant has sent this update from Mexico City.
Shortly before her morning press conference, Claudia Sheinbaum put out a statement on the social media site X in which she said that Mexico will immediately reinforce its northern border. That's, of course, the border with the United States, with 10,000 members of the National Guard, and they would focus on drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl. That the US was committed to working to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons south into Mexico, an important point for her. And then, of course, the main point in terms of the tariffs and the threat of tariffs, she said they are pausing tariffs for 1 month from now. So look, both sides are likely to present that outcome as a victory. Claudia Sheinbaum can say that she's got a commitment from Donald Trump to focus on the issue of weapons coming into Mexico from the US, arming the Mexican drug cartels, a point that successive governments have made to successive governments in Washington. So that will be a plus for her. And of course, critically, she's staved off the tariffs for another month. In turn, Donald Trump will say, look, simply the threat of tariffs against one of our neighbours is enough to bring them to the negotiating table and get what I want, which is more people on the border, more focus on undocumented immigrants and on fentanyl trafficking. The truth is, there has been a bit of movement on both sides. For the Mexican economy, this is a good thing, because if the tariffs are to be imposed elsewhere on China, the EU, on Canada, creating the potential for a global trade war, then certainly Mexico is in a good position for the next month. This cross-border trade is worth hundreds of billions to the two neighbours every year, and that she has avoided the threat of tariffs on that trade will certainly be presented as a victory by her camp.
Will Grant reporting from Mexico City. So what exactly is a tariff and why do governments use them as an economic tool? To explain this, we're joined by Clarissa Hahn from Oxford Economics. Clarissa, thank you very much. We're not all economists, are we? Unlike you. So it's really useful, I think, just to take a step back and consider what a tariff is and how it's used. So, yeah, that basic definition of a tariff, first of all, if you would.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So tariffs are taxes imposed by a government on goods and services imported from other countries. So you can think of it like an extra cost added to foreign products when they enter the country. So they're usually a percentage of the price of the good, making imported items a bit more expensive compared to locally produced goods. So say I sell an apple to the US at £1, 25% tariff basically means that as a producer, I now only get 75p in my pocket. So what you do to raise the price to protect your margin. So that means the US consumer just faces a higher price for something as simple as a foreign apple.
Yeah, so typically in a situation where tariffs are being imposed by one country, does that benefit the country imposing them, or does it end up not working out so well for that country? I guess it depends on the situation.
Yeah, so I mean, if we think of it, say, in the case of the US, right? So the country imposing the tariff. So in a country like the US, domestic industries might benefit because of reduced foreign competition in the most simple way. So if foreign goods are now relatively more expensive, this would drive up demand for domestic products. So allowing domestic industries to expand production as they see higher increase in demand. But it might not be so simple because obviously, US industries and industries globally have global supply chains, so they rely on imported materials or parts. So say, for example, if you're a US car producer, even if tariffs are being imposed on other countries, the cost of materials and parts that go into the car may have increased as a result of the tariff. So because industries now have such global supply chains, in a way, domestic industries may benefit, but as supply chains are so global, they might also see an increase in cost of production, say.
Typically, is a tariff as much a political tool as an economic one?
Yeah, I mean, so a tariff can, as a government imposing it, can be used for many different reasons, right? So some people talk about, you know, maybe they're doing it to increase government revenue. It is a tax after all. But we see in this example with Trump, it's often also used as a political tool and a negotiation tool with other countries. But as we've just talked about, it's also really popular with citizens sometimes because it boosts domestic industries, obviously, when you take out the complication of the global supply chains.
OK, and then, Clarissa, in terms of the tariffs we're talking about in this particular instance, up to 25%, for example, on Canada and Mexico, although the Mexican tariff has been delayed for a month, is that a big percentage, or do tariffs tend to be smaller usually?
I mean, we've seen... We've done some modeling exercises globally, internally, and 25% tariffs can cause big implications on the countries they're imposed on. So say, for example, in Canada, where we've seen the tariffs go through so far, more than 70% of exports are to the US. So that would have quite a substantial impact on the exports from Canada. So say if you're a Canadian producer, most of what you're exporting goes to the US, this will lead to lower export demand, and as such, US exports are such a big proportion of what you're producing, then it will have a big impact on the sector, especially if it relies a lot on the US.
OK, Clarissa, we are out of time, but thank you for explaining that very clearly. Clarissa Hahn from Oxford Economics.